What if the fairy tale you grew up with was a lie? What if Little Red Riding Hood was never rescued? What if there was no woodsman, no justice, no happy ending at all? In the original version of Little Red Riding Hood, the girl is never saved. There is no hero who arrives in time. The wolf is not punished, and the child dies. But that's not the most disturbing part, because this story was never meant for children. It was a warning, a moral lesson, a dark reflection of real dangers people once faced. And somewhere along the way, the truth was buried. Welcome to Lore Labyrinth. If you're drawn to the hidden history behind familiar stories, subscribe for more unsettling lore. Like the video to help this story reach others, and share it with someone who thinks fairy tales are harmless. Now let's begin. You already know this story, or at least you think you do. A young girl in a red hood is sent through the forest to visit her sick grandmother. Her mother warns her not to stray from the path. Along the way, she meets a wolf, clever, smooth-talking, but ultimately foolish. The wolf reaches the grandmother's house first, disguises himself, and waits. The girl arrives. The deception is revealed, and just in time, a heroic woodsman bursts through the door. The wolf is killed. The girl is saved. Order is restored. That is the version printed in children's books. That is the version read aloud at bedtime. That is the version that ends safely before the lights go out. But that story is not the original. In the earliest recorded versions told across rural Europe, long before illustrated pages and gentle morals, there is no rescue, no axe breaking down the door, no second chance. What we were told was a softened lie. Because in the real story, the girl does exactly what she is warned not to do. She listens, she trusts, she talks. And the forest does not forgive her for it. The danger was never loud. It never chased her. It spoke calmly, patiently, like someone who knew exactly what to say. And that raises a question that was never meant to be comfortable. But what if the wolf was never just a wolf? To truly understand Little Red Riding Hood, we must travel back to Paris, France, in 1697, where a man named Charles Perrault recorded the first written version in his collection, Histoires ou Contes du Temps Passé. Perrault was not writing for entertainment alone. He was creating cautionary tales for society, wrapped in stories that would be remembered and repeated. In Perrault's version, the girl wears a red hood, a detail that seems innocent at first glance, but it carried meaning. In 17th century France, red clothing for young girls was often a symbol of maturity and coming of age. It marked her as visible, noticeable, and, to certain men, a target. This was not a story about innocence preserved. It was about innocence at risk. The wolf in this telling is far from a mindless animal. He is a gentleman predator, smooth, polite, and calculated. He does not attack outright. He convinces, he questions, he listens, and he separates the girl from safety with words rather than claws. Every step she takes toward the grandmother's house is a step she takes willingly, manipulated by charm and deception. And there is no rescue. There is no heroic woodsman bursting through the door. The girl is swallowed whole, her fate sealed by the very curiosity and trust that the story encourages and simultaneously warns against. The ending is grim, direct, and deliberate. Perrault included an explicit moral warning at the end of the story, leaving no doubt young girls must be cautious, wary, and skeptical of strangers. The danger was not a fairy tale wolf. It was the real danger hidden behind the guise of civility and manners. And here is the chilling truth that most people overlook. Perrault wasn't warning children. He was warning girls. He was writing about real threats in real society, disguised as a bedtime story that would ensure the lesson was remembered. Because in the forests of France and in the homes of every village, danger often wore a familiar face, And that danger was far closer than anyone wanted to admit. In the oldest versions of Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf is not a beast lurking in the shadows. He does not leap from the bushes. He does not snarl or bare his teeth. He approaches openly. In rural France in the late 17th century, this detail mattered. Villages were small, forest paths were familiar. The greatest dangers were rarely monsters. They were people. The wolf speaks politely. He asks questions. He listens. Where are you going? Who are you visiting? How far does she live from here? And the girl answers every one of them. This is not a chase, it is a conversation. In the 1697 version recorded by Charles Perrault in Paris, the wolf behaves like a gentleman of the court, well-spoken, calm, and confident. Perrault's audience would have recognized him instantly. This was not a wild animal. This was a predator wearing manners like a disguise. At the time, wolves in folklore often symbolized more than danger. They represented men who hunted trust instead of flesh. Men who used words, status, or charm to disarm their victims. Aristocrats, clergymen, strangers with power. The wolf never forces the girl off the path. He suggests it. He proposes a harmless game. He praises her curiosity. He encourages her independence. And slowly, without ever raising his voice, he separates her from safety. This is where the story becomes deeply uncomfortable, because the manipulation is deliberate, calculated, patient. The wolf does not rush ahead because he is faster. He rushes ahead because he knows exactly where she is going. He uses the information she freely gives him. This mirrors the real fears of 17th century Europe, where young girls were warned not about animals, but about men who smiled, listened, and waited. The lesson was never subtle. The wolf doesn't chase her, he convinces her. And once he reaches the grandmother's house, the story makes something else painfully clear. The danger doesn't end when you realize the truth. By then, it's already too late. But this is only one version of the warning. Because when the story crossed borders and reached Germany more than a century later, it would be reshaped again, made darker, more violent, and far more revealing. And what Germany added would change the story forever. In 1812, more than a century after Charles Perrault's version circulated through France, the story crossed into Germany, where it was recorded by two brothers whose names would become inseparable from fairy tales themselves, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. The Germany they lived in was not a land of innocence. It was a society shaped by strict Christian morality, rigid social hierarchy, and an obsession with obedience, especially for women and children. Stories were not just entertainment, they were tools. The Grimms claimed they were preserving folklore, but what they were really doing was reshaping it to reflect the values of their time. And this is where Little Red Riding Hood changes, dramatically. For the first time, a rescuer appears, a woodsman, a man of action, a symbol of order, arriving with an axe in hand. In the Grimm version, the wolf swallows both the grandmother and the girl whole. Later, the woodsman cuts open the wolf's belly, pulling them out alive, miraculously unharmed. The wolf is then filled with stones and collapses under his own weight, dead. It sounds like salvation. It sounds like justice. But the violence is unmistakable. The act is surgical, slow, and brutal. The wolf is not chased away. He is opened, displayed, punished. And the girl is told exactly why she survived, because she learned to obey. This resurrection was not kindness. It was correction. The message was clear in early 19th century Germany. Disobedience leads to death, but obedience, guided by male authority, can undo even the worst mistakes. Yet something unsettling remains. Despite the rescue, the girl still enters the bed. She still speaks to the wolf. She still fails to recognize danger until it is directly in front of her. The Grimm brothers did not erase the threat. They disciplined it. They turned a cautionary tragedy into a moral lesson, but left the fear intact, because fear was the point. And beneath the Christian framing, beneath the resurrection and punishment, something darker survived the edit. Because even in this version, the girl's safety depends entirely on someone arriving in time. And if the woodsman hadn't been there, the story would have ended exactly as it always had. But the Grimm version hid something even more disturbing. Even in the Grimm version, the story reaches its darkest moment in the grandmother's bedroom, a place that should have symbolized safety, but instead becomes a stage for deception and danger. In the original German text, the wolf does not simply wait passively. He uses dialogue to manipulate. He asks questions in a soft, coaxing voice. He comments on the girl's red hood, on how clever she is, how brave she must be to wander so far alone. And with each word, he draws her closer, emotionally, psychologically, physically. The bedroom itself is full of symbolism. The bed represents innocence and vulnerability. The grandmother's clothes, her nightdress, the coverings, are replaced by the wolf's disguise. He is not just taking the grandmother's place, he is taking her identity. And the girl's curiosity, her insistence on noticing differences, on asking questions, becomes the tool that seals her fate. In some of the earliest documented French and German texts, the wolf instructs her to come closer, lift the covers, or remove layers of clothing, as if to check that she is safe. The language is subtle, almost playful, but the implications are chilling. Here, Perrault's original warning comes alive. The story is not about a wolf in the forest. It is about trusting the wrong person, about appearances hiding danger, about the thin line between curiosity and naivety. The bed becomes a stage for coming-of-age warnings. Innocence can be exploited. Obedience, or lack thereof, has consequences. And in these versions, the lesson is clear. The consequences are not always reversed by a savior. The tone drops here, deliberately slow. The room is quiet, only the soft voice of the wolf. Only the girl's hesitant replies. The story is intimate, uncomfortable, and far from the playful tales read to children today. This was never a bedtime story, and it was based on real dangers that villages across Europe feared every day. Real dangers that mothers whispered about, disguised as fairy tales, to keep their children alive, because the forest was not the only danger. The danger was in the house, in the voice, in the trust given too freely, and that lesson would follow every telling of the tale for centuries. To understand why Little Red Riding Hood was written in such a dark, disturbing way, we have to leave the pages of fairy tale books and step into 17th and 18th century Europe. This was a world very different from the picture book forest we imagine today. Villages were isolated, separated by dense woods and miles of rough terrain. Roads were dangerous, and help was rare. A single traveler or child could disappear and no one would notice until it was too late. For young girls, the risks were even greater. Sexual violence was a constant threat, yet laws and protections were virtually non-existent. Communities had to rely on stories, warnings, and traditions to teach survival, because formal safeguards simply did not exist. Mothers whispered cautionary tales in kitchens and bedrooms, carefully encoded as fairy tales so the lesson could be remembered without spreading panic. The wolf was never just a wolf. He was the stranger who smiled, the neighbor who lingered too long, the man who seemed trustworthy but had hidden intentions. Every detail in the story, from talking too freely to straying off the path, was meant as a coded survival lesson. This was the grim reality behind what we now call a children's story. Fairy tales were not just entertainment. They were how villages taught fear, without saying it aloud. And it was a lesson that, over centuries, would be softened, rewritten, and repackaged. Yet the original warning, the real danger, remained hidden beneath the surface. Because beneath the colors and rhymes, the story whispered one terrifying truth. The world could be cruel, and innocence alone was never enough to protect you. And that hidden truth is what the sanitized versions tried hardest to erase. By the mid-19th century, Europe had changed. The forests of France and Germany were no longer the isolated, perilous places they once were, but the fear of danger persisted. The story of Little Red Riding Hood, like many fairy tales, was reinterpreted during the Victorian era, a period obsessed with propriety, morality, and innocence. Publishing for children had become a booming industry. Books were printed in large numbers, illustrations brightened the pages, and stories that had once carried harsh survival lessons were reshaped to entertain, educate, and comfort. The dangers were softened. The wolf became less a predator of manipulation and more a literal beast to be chased away. Sexual warnings, subtle manipulations, and the uncomfortable lessons about trust were carefully removed. Mothers, educators, and publishers alike decided that children should be shielded from the harsh realities of adult dangers. The bed scenes were toned down. The conversation with the wolf was no longer sinister. It became quaint. The fear of predatory men was replaced by a simple tale of mischief and rescue. The goal was clear: create safe myths. Stories that looked dangerous on the surface but ultimately offered comfort and closure. Red Riding Hood could now survive by the mercy of a woodsman, rather than by understanding cunning and danger for herself. But in making it safe, we erase the warning. We erase the very reason the story existed. The story no longer taught caution. It no longer reflected reality. It became a game, a rhyme, a bedtime tale. And that softening would hide centuries of fear, manipulation, and the real lessons about human danger behind a smiling mask. Because the original story's power did not lie in the happy ending. It lay in the truth that was almost too painful to tell. And the truth is what we are uncovering today. After centuries of retelling, from Perrault's Paris of 1697 to the Grimm's Germany of 1812, and finally to the Victorian-era children's books, the story of Little Red Riding Hood seems familiar, even comforting. But if we strip away the colorful illustrations, the heroic woodsman, and the tidy endings, the core truth emerges, and it is far darker than the versions most of us were told. The story is not about wolves. It is about people. It is about how trust can be dangerous, how someone who seems polite, kind, or even familiar can hide intentions that will destroy you if you are unprepared. It is about appearances deceiving. A warm voice can hide cruelty. A charming smile can hide manipulation. And innocence, so often celebrated in fairy tales, is vulnerable, fragile, and all too easy to exploit. The girl in the red hood did not lose because she was weak. She lost because she trusted. Every choice she made, the path she took, the questions she asked, the words she spoke, was entirely human. And that is what made her story so terrifyingly realistic. From the isolated villages of 17th century France to the moralistic forests of 19th century Germany, these tales were warnings encoded as entertainment, teaching children, especially young girls, about the dangers of the world without ever naming them outright. The real message they never taught you is simple yet chilling. Survival is not about strength. It is about understanding danger, about questioning what seems safe, about seeing through appearances. Little Red Riding Hood didn't lose because she was weak. She lost because she trusted. And that lesson, hidden for centuries behind sanitized versions and comforting morals, is the truth that still echoes in every retelling. Because fairy tales were never just stories. They were survival manuals in disguise, and the world behind the story was far darker than any wolf could ever be. So the next time you hear a fairy tale, ask yourself, what was removed to make it comfortable? Did this story change how you see fairy tales? Which story should we uncover next? If you want to explore the dark truths hidden behind the stories you thought you knew, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Lore Labyrinth, and leave a comment with the story you want us to reveal next. Because every tale has a shadow, and some shadows are more dangerous than others.